The night was cold, and the streets were nearly empty. A dim streetlight flickered over a small house at the end of the lane, where an old woman sat by the window, her eyes fixed on the road. She had been waiting for years, longing to see the one person who meant everything to her, her son. Every night, she prayed for his success, believing that her blessings would one day lead him to greatness. Ravi had left home years ago, chasing a dream that seemed impossible from their small town. His mother, Meera, had always believed in him, even when the world doubted him. She had raised him alone after his father's sudden passing, working tirelessly to provide him with the best she could. Despite their struggles, she never let Ravi feel that they were lacking. A mother's blessings can turn even the smallest efforts into miracles, she would say, her hands gently patting his head as he studied late into the night. Life, however, had not been easy for Ravi. When he first arrived in the city, full of hopes and ambitions, he was quickly met with reality. Job rejections, financial struggles, and endless nights of self-doubt became his daily routine. Many times, he thought of giving up and returning home, but his mother's words echoed in his mind. "Every challenge is a test, my son. Keep walking, and the right doors will open." One evening, as he sat alone on a park bench, staring at his last few rupees, he received a call from his mother. She sensed the heaviness in his voice and, without asking too many questions, simply said, "You will succeed. My blessings are always with you." Those words, simple yet powerful, ignited something within him. He wiped his tears, took a deep breath, and made a silent promise: he would make her proud. But success did not come overnight. Ravi struggled, taking up odd jobs, learning new skills, and pushing himself beyond his limits. He faced betrayal from friends, failure in business, and moments of sheer hopelessness. Yet, he never forgot his mother's unwavering faith in him. He worked harder, stayed persistent, and kept moving forward, no matter how slow the progress seemed. Then came the turning point. An opportunity he had never imagined. A well-known entrepreneur, impressed by Ravi's dedication and resilience, offered him a chance to prove himself. It was a make-or-break moment. If he failed, he would lose everything. If he succeeded, his life would change forever. Ravi stood at the doorstep of his biggest challenge yet, his heart pounding, his hands trembling. He closed his eyes and whispered a silent prayer, remembering his mother's words: "A mother's blessings can move mountains." Would his years of struggle finally pay off? Or was another heartbreak waiting around the corner? Ravi took a deep breath and stepped forward. His mind raced with doubts, but he pushed them aside. He had come too far to let fear hold him back. The grand office building in front of him felt intimidating, a stark contrast to the small, modest home he had grown up in. He adjusted his shirt, wiped the sweat from his palms, and walked inside. The receptionist looked up and gave him a polite nod. "You must be Mr. Ravi. Mr. Khanna is expecting you." Ravi nodded, his voice caught in his throat. He had read about Mr. Arjun Khanna, a self-made business tycoon, known for his sharp mind and ruthless decisions. The kind of man who never gave second chances. Ravi knew this was his one shot. As he entered the large conference room, his heart pounded. Mr. Khanna sat at the far end of a long table, flipping through a file. He didn't look up immediately, but Ravi could feel the weight of his presence. After what felt like an eternity, Mr. Khanna closed the file and finally met Ravi's gaze. His eyes were sharp, unreadable. "I've heard a lot about you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Tell me, why should I take a chance on you?" Ravi swallowed hard. He had prepared for this, but now, under Khanna's piercing stare, every word he had practiced felt meaningless. He knew he couldn't afford to sound rehearsed. He had to be real. "Because I don't give up," Ravi said, his voice steady despite the nerves. "I've struggled, failed, and learned. But no matter how many times I fell, I got back up. I don't expect success to be easy, but I'm willing to work harder than anyone else to earn it." For a moment, there was silence. Mr. Khanna studied him carefully, then leaned back in his chair. Impressive words, he said, his expression unreadable. But words alone don't build success. I need proof. I need results. Ravi nodded. He had expected this. Give me one chance, he said. Give me one task, one project. If I fail, I'll walk away without wasting any more of your time. But if I succeed, I'll prove that I'm worth the risk. A flicker of amusement crossed Mr. Khanna's face. You remind me of myself when I was younger, he said, almost to himself. Then, after a pause, he nodded. Fine. You have 1 week. If you deliver, we'll talk about something bigger. Ravi's chest tightened with excitement and fear. 1 week. That was all he had. As he walked out of the office, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His mother. He hesitated before answering, not wanting to sound nervous. Ma. Her voice, warm and familiar, immediately calmed him. How did it go? I got a chance, he said, unable to hide the slight tremor in his voice. I knew you would, she said, as if there had never been a doubt. Remember, my blessings are with you. Just do your best. Ravi closed his eyes for a second, letting her words sink in. He wished she were here with him, sitting beside him, reassuring him the way she used to when he was a child. But she was miles away, waiting for him to return with good news. He wouldn't let her down. The next 7 days were the most exhausting of his life. He barely slept, pouring every ounce of energy into his project. He knew that failure wasn't an option. Every time exhaustion threatened to take over, he reminded himself why he was doing this. Not just for himself, but for his mother, for every sacrifice she had made. On the 4th night, as he worked late in the office, he overheard 2 employees talking. He's just another desperate guy, one of them scoffed. Mr. Khanna tests people like this all the time. Most of them fail. Ravi's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew there were people who doubted him. But he didn't need their belief. He had his own. By the time the 7th day arrived, Ravi had done everything he could. His presentation was ready, his research was solid, and he had given it his all. Yet, as he stood outside the conference room, waiting for his turn, doubt began to creep in. What if it wasn't enough? What if, after all this, he still failed? He thought of his mother's face, the way she had always looked at him with pride, no matter how small his achievements were. He couldn't bear the thought of disappointing her. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. Mr. Khanna was already there, surrounded by senior executives. The air was thick with tension. Let's begin, Mr. Khanna said, his tone neutral. Ravi nodded and started his presentation. His voice was steady, his points clear. He had practiced this 100 times, but as he spoke, he realized something. This wasn't just a presentation. This was his story. Every struggle, every setback had led him to this moment. He wasn't just selling an idea. He was proving his worth. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Ravi held his breath. Mr. Khanna leaned back, fingers interlocked. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then, finally, he turned to his executives. Thoughts? One of them shifted uncomfortably. It's impressive, he admitted. But it's risky. All success is, Mr. Khanna replied. He turned back to Ravi, his expression unreadable. You've done well, he said. Better than I expected. Hope flared in Ravi's chest, but before he could respond, Mr. Khanna added, But is it enough? The words hit Ravi like a punch to the gut. His heart pounded. Was it enough? Had he given everything, only to come up short? Mr. Khanna studied him, as if weighing his next words carefully. The room felt suffocating, the tension unbearable. Then, finally, he spoke. And Ravi's world was about to change forever. Ravi's breath caught in his throat as he waited for Mr. Khanna's next words. The room was silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He could feel the eyes of every executive on him, some curious, some skeptical. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. He had done everything he could, poured his heart into this project. Now, it was no longer in his hands. Mr. Khanna exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers on the table. "You've shown promise," he said at last. "But promise isn't enough. This industry doesn't run on effort alone. It runs on results." A knot tightened in Ravi's stomach. He had expected this challenge, but hearing it still stung. He wasn't asking for an easy way in, he was asking for a chance to prove himself. "I understand," Ravi said carefully, keeping his voice steady. "But I believe this plan will work. I've analyzed every risk, every possible outcome. I know it's not perfect, but if given the right resources, I can make it happen." Mr. Khanna leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "And if it fails?" Ravi held his ground. "Then I'll take full responsibility. But I won't fail." The confidence in his voice surprised even him. He wasn't just saying it to impress them, he believed it. He had no other option. Mr. Khanna didn't reply immediately. Instead, he turned to the others in the room. "I want a full risk assessment on this," he instructed. "Give me a detailed report by tomorrow morning." Ravi's heart raced. Tomorrow. That meant this wasn't over yet. As he stepped out of the conference room, his mind spun with uncertainty. He had made it through the presentation, but that didn't mean he had won. He needed to prepare for the next step. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked the screen. His mother again. He hesitated before answering, not wanting her to sense his anxiety. "Hello, Ma. How did it go?" she asked, her voice warm as always. "It's not decided yet," Ravi admitted. "They're still thinking." There was a pause. Then, softly, she said, "They will see your worth. Just like I do." Her words were simple, but they steadied him. He forced a smile. "I hope so." That night, Ravi barely slept. He kept going over his project, thinking about potential questions, potential doubts. His mind wouldn't rest. The next morning, he arrived at the office early. The waiting was unbearable. Hours passed, and finally, he was called back into the conference room. Mr. Khanna sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. The executives had their reports in front of them. "The risk assessment is complete," Mr. Khanna said. "There are concerns, but there is also potential." He glanced at Ravi. "Are you ready to take this on?" Ravi's heart pounded. This was it. "Yes," he said firmly. "I won't disappoint you." Mr. Khanna studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then let's see what you can do." Relief and excitement flooded Ravi at once. He had the opportunity he had been fighting for. But he knew this was just the beginning. The real test was about to start. As he left the office, determination burned in his chest. He had made it this far. Now he had to prove that he deserved to be here. But what he didn't know was that not everyone wanted him to succeed. In the shadows, someone was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And Ravi's biggest challenge was yet to come. Ravi threw himself into the project with everything he had. The days blurred together as he worked relentlessly, fine-tuning every detail. He barely ate, barely slept. His mind was consumed by calculations, strategies, and deadlines. This was his moment to prove himself, and he wasn't going to waste it. But pressure had a way of creeping in, no matter how strong he tried to be. The weight of expectations grew heavier with each passing day. Every time he walked into the office, he could feel the skeptical eyes watching him, waiting for him to slip. Some colleagues were supportive, but others weren't as welcoming. One evening, as Ravi sat in his small cubicle, going through data, he overheard whispers from the hallway. "I don't get it. Why is Mr. Khanna even giving this guy a chance? He's just another desperate newcomer. Probably won't last a month." Ravi clenched his jaw but kept his focus on his work. He didn't have time to care about their doubts. He had come too far to let negativity shake him now. But things took a turn when strange obstacles started appearing out of nowhere. Important files went missing from his desk. An incorrect report was submitted under his name, one he had never even seen before. Meetings were rescheduled at the last minute without informing him. It was subtle, but it was clear. Someone was trying to sabotage him. Ravi tried to stay calm, but frustration built inside him. He had worked so hard, and now unseen forces were trying to pull him down. He needed to stay ahead of whoever was behind this. One night, as he stayed late at the office, rechecking documents, he noticed something strange. The reports he had worked on earlier had been altered. Small changes, but enough to cause serious errors if left unnoticed. His heart pounded as he checked his emails. There was no record of any edits being made. Someone had done this deliberately. A chill ran down his spine. This wasn't just competition. This was sabotage. He had to find out who was behind it. The next day, Ravi was more alert than ever. He kept his files locked, double-checked every document, and started watching people more closely. That evening, he saw something suspicious. A senior employee, Rohan, who had always been distant toward him, was standing near Ravi's cubicle, looking around. When he saw Ravi approaching, he quickly turned and walked away. Something wasn't right. Ravi decided to test his theory. That night, before leaving, he placed a small mark on his documents. Nothing noticeable, just a tiny fold in the corner of one page. If someone touched them, he would know. The next morning, his suspicion was confirmed. The mark was gone. Someone had tampered with his files again. Ravi's fists clenched. He wasn't just fighting for his success now. He was fighting against someone who wanted to see him fail. He needed to gather proof. But time was running out. His final project presentation was just days away, and if he didn't stop this in time, all his hard work could be ruined. The stakes had never been higher. Ravi's mind raced as he pieced everything together. Someone was deliberately trying to sabotage his work, and the most likely suspect was Rohan. But why? Was it jealousy? A personal grudge? Or was there something even bigger at play? He couldn't afford to make accusations without proof. He needed to be smart. He started making copies of all his files, storing backups where no one could tamper with them. He also began keeping detailed records of every change made, ensuring that if something went wrong, he would have a trail to follow. But just when Ravi thought he had a handle on the situation, something unexpected happened. Late one evening, as he was wrapping up for the night, he received an anonymous email. Be careful who you trust. This isn't just about your project. It's bigger than you think. His heart pounded. Was this some kind of warning? Or was someone trying to mess with his head? He read the email again, looking for clues, but there was no sender name, no details, just those cryptic words. A strange uneasiness settled over him. What did they mean by bigger than you think? The next morning, Ravi arrived at the office earlier than usual, determined to act like nothing had changed. He needed to keep his guard up. But as soon as he walked in, he noticed something off. People were whispering, exchanging glances. The tension in the air was thick. Something had happened. He hurried to his desk, and that's when he saw it. His project report, the one he had spent weeks perfecting, had been printed out and placed on his chair. But the data inside was completely wrong. Numbers had been manipulated. Key insights had been removed. Panic surged through him. If this report was seen by Mr. Khanna or the executives, it would destroy his credibility. It would look like he had made critical mistakes, mistakes he knew he hadn't made. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. Whoever had done this wasn't just trying to slow him down anymore. They wanted him gone. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to think clearly. He still had his original copies. He could prove the changes weren't his. But before he could act, a voice interrupted him. Ravi. He turned to see Mr. Khanna standing at the entrance of the office. His face was unreadable. Come to my office. Now. Ravi's stomach twisted into knots. He had a bad feeling about this. As he followed Mr. Khanna down the hall, he could feel everyone's eyes on him. Whispers grew louder. His mind was racing. Had the fake report already reached him? When they reached the office, Mr. Khanna shut the door behind them. He walked over to his desk, picked up a file, and placed it in front of Ravi. This is your report, correct? Ravi stared at the pages. It was the altered version. No, he said immediately. Someone tampered with it. Mr. Khanna's eyes narrowed. Tampered? Yes. I have the real version. I don't know who did this, but I can prove that this is not my work. For a long moment, Mr. Khanna said nothing. Then, finally, he gestured toward the chair. Sit. Ravi obeyed, his mind still spinning. You've done well so far, Mr. Khanna said, watching him closely. But not everyone wants you here. And now, it seems like someone is making sure you don't succeed. Ravi's breath caught. Mr. Khanna knew. I've seen things like this before, he continued. People who feel threatened by new talent often play dirty. The question is, are you ready to fight back? Ravi straightened. He had been waiting for this moment, waiting for someone to believe him. Yes, he said firmly. But I don't know who's behind it. Mr. Khanna leaned forward. I do. Ravi's heart pounded. Who? Mr. Khanna exhaled, his expression serious. Rohan is involved, he said. But he's not the only one. A cold chill ran down Ravi's spine. If Rohan wasn't working alone, then that meant there was someone even more powerful pulling the strings. And he had no idea how deep this went. Ravi felt his pulse quicken. He had suspected Rohan, but knowing he wasn't acting alone made the situation far more dangerous. If someone higher up was involved, this wasn't just about office politics. It was something bigger, something calculated. Who else is behind this? Ravi asked, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Mr. Khanna didn't answer right away. He studied Ravi for a moment before finally saying, I can't tell you yet. But you're not the only one being tested. Ravi frowned. Tested? This is more than just a project, Mr. Khanna continued. The company is undergoing a major shift. Some people are willing to do anything to protect their positions. They see fresh talent like you as a threat. Ravi clenched his fists. He had worked too hard to let someone else decide his fate. Then what do I do? Mr. Khanna leaned back, his gaze sharp. You finish what you started. But this time, you stay one step ahead. Ravi knew what that meant. If he wanted to prove himself, he had to present his project flawlessly. And more importantly, he had to expose whoever was trying to bring him down. That night, he worked harder than ever. He triple-checked every detail, ensured there were no gaps, and prepared a backup plan in case anything went wrong. He wasn't going to give them any room to manipulate his work again. The next morning, the entire company gathered in the boardroom for the final presentation. The air was thick with tension. Rohan sat at the far end, his expression unreadable. Ravi could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he pushed aside his nerves. This was it. He stepped forward and began presenting. His voice was steady, his confidence unwavering. He walked them through the numbers, the strategy, and the vision. Every word was calculated, every slide precise. Halfway through, he noticed movement in the corner of his eye. Rohan shifted in his seat, glancing at his phone. Ravi knew something was about to happen. Then, just as he reached the most crucial part of his proposal, the screen behind him flickered. The data changed. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Someone was trying to sabotage him in real time. But he was ready. Without missing a beat, he turned to the audience. It seems like there's been an unexpected change in the display, he said calmly. But I anticipated this. Which is why I have a hard copy of the original report right here. He reached into his bag and pulled out a printed version. The real data, untouched and unaltered. The room fell silent. Mr. Khanna's eyes met his, and Ravi saw something in them, approval. Rohan, however, shifted uncomfortably. His fingers tapped against the table, his confidence slipping. Then, before anyone could say a word, Mr. Khanna spoke. Security, please escort Rohan out. A collective gasp echoed in the room. Rohan's face drained of color. Sir, Enough, Mr. Khanna interrupted. We know what you did. And we know you weren't working alone. He turned to the other executives. There will be a full internal investigation. Rohan shot a glare at Ravi before being led away. But Ravi barely noticed. His heart was still pounding. He had won, not just the project, but the battle against those who had tried to take him down. As the meeting wrapped up, Mr. Khanna approached him. You handled that well, he said. You proved you belong here. Ravi exhaled, feeling the weight lift off his shoulders. Thank you, sir. Mr. Khanna gave a small nod. But be careful. The person Rohan was working for? They're still out there. A chill ran down Ravi's spine. The battle was over. But the war might not be. Ravi stood in the now empty conference room, his heart still racing from everything that had unfolded. The echoes of whispered conversations faded as employees filed out, still processing the shocking turn of events. The reality of what had just happened was sinking in. He had not only defended his work but had also exposed a deeper web of deception within the company. Mr. Khanna's words played over in his mind. The person Rohan was working for? They're still out there. A part of him wanted to celebrate his victory, but another part knew this wasn't the end. There was still an invisible force working behind the scenes, someone who had gone to great lengths to ensure his failure. But for now, he had done his part. He had earned his place. As he gathered his things, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Ravi. He turned to see Mira, one of the senior analysts who had always been kind to him. She gave him a small smile. That was impressive. The way you handled everything. Thanks, Ravi said, still trying to steady his emotions. Mira hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. I need to tell you something, she said in a lower voice. I don't have proof, but I think Rohan was being used as a pawn. The real mastermind, whoever they are, they're higher up than we think. Ravi wasn't surprised. Do you have any idea who it could be? She shook her head. Not yet. But be careful. Just because Rohan is gone doesn't mean you're safe. Ravi nodded, appreciating the warning. But he also knew he couldn't live in fear. He had gotten this far by staying focused, by believing in himself. He wasn't about to let an unknown threat shake him now. Over the next few weeks, the office settled back into routine. Rohan's departure sent ripples through the company, and soon, an internal audit was launched to uncover any deeper corruption. Ravi kept his head down, working harder than ever, proving that he belonged, not because of luck, but because of his dedication and skills. One afternoon, he received an unexpected call from Mr. Khanna's office. As he stepped inside, he found the senior executive standing by the window, deep in thought. Ravi, Mr. Khanna said, turning to face him. I wanted to tell you this personally. You've earned a promotion. Ravi's breath caught. Sir. Mr. Khanna smiled slightly. You didn't just prove your abilities with the project. You proved your resilience, your ability to handle pressure, and most importantly, your integrity. That's what this company needs. Ravi felt a wave of emotions wash over him. He had dreamed of this moment, but after everything that had happened, it felt even more meaningful. Thank you, sir, he said, his voice steady. Mr. Khanna nodded. I have no doubt you'll do great things. Just remember, power comes with responsibility. And there will always be people who don't want to see you succeed. Stay sharp. Ravi took those words to heart. He knew the journey wasn't over. Challenges would come, obstacles would appear, and not everyone would want to see him rise. But he also knew he had something stronger than any sabotage or hidden enemy: his perseverance. That evening, as he stepped out of the office building, he looked up at the sky. It was a reminder of how far he had come, from a small town with nothing but a dream, to standing here, making a name for himself. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past months finally lift. He had won this battle. And no matter what lay ahead, he was ready. Because success wasn't just about reaching the top. It was about the journey, the lessons, and the resilience to keep moving forward.